Blanchard here, Adrenaline Motorsports. You're listening to 1680 AM on your dial, internet radio. And here today with in studio guest, a good friend, a longtime friend, as a matter of fact, Don Prieto. There was some tire testing done, wasn't there? And I know that, unfortunately, whom we're talking about now, Lefty Matersbach, lost his life in tire testing, if I'm not mistaken.
He was at he had built a brand new car for Dick Goss, who was one of the top runners at Irwindale Speedway, and Lefty had long since retired, and he built this car, and they went to the drag strip, and I think Don Yates was supposed to show up and drive it, and he got sidetracked or had business to deal with, and so Lefty jumped in it to make a run, and they had built what they call zoomy headers, which is the headers pointing at the tire to blow the smoke away. And about 3/4 of the way down, the tires grew, which they normally did, and the headers carved the center of the tire, and the tire popped, and he went over into the boulder orchard out there at Irwindale and was killed, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I remember the event very well. In fact, we were there, and very tragic because it was close to, so to speak, my wife's family and that kind of thing, friends, related people, and all the friends that we had been around and people, and that was one of the first things that struck us was drag racing, as it is a sport that you have to be very careful in, and we didn't know these things, but we learned a lesson by somebody else's experience, and that was very sad at that time.
What really surprised me, I'd never been to a funeral for somebody who was killed in a race car. And we went to Rose Hills over here on the 605 freeway, and there must have been 500 people at Lefty's funeral, which really knocked me out as to how many of the community. I'd been to funerals all my life, but never one for a racer, and there were always 15 to 20 family, and that was it, you know.
Yeah,
but 500 people, it knocked me out.
Yeah.
And the same when Mickey got killed.
Yeah.
There must have been 1,000 people at that funeral.
Isn't that amazing?
Really something.
Well, that's the nature. It's a huge, giant family, whether we're related or not related, but in the same sport, and that's what it is. Racing is a huge community, and it's intermingled with so many aspects of racing, not necessarily just circle track or drag racing or land speed. It's all in one when it gets right down to it. You know, another thing that I wanted to touch on was that we were talking about your experiences in racing, but I mentioned on the intro that you've written a lot of articles in a lot of magazines, and why don't you touch on that a little bit, how you got involved with that?
Well, I was working for Yackel Plymouth in 1965, and Phil Bellamy, who was the editor of Drag Sport Illustrated, and I had become friends, and he called me up and he said, "I'd like you to come to work as an editor and sell some ads for this newspaper, so I can get it going." He knew that I had a journalism background from LSU in Louisiana, and so I agreed to do that. And then he spread the word that I was going to work there, and John Durbin, who was editor of Drag Racing Magazine, said, "I hear you're going to work for Bellamy." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, it's going to be a hit-and-miss proposition because the paper is floundering." He says, "Well, why don't you come talk to us about working at Drag Racing Magazine?" So I did, and they promised me a real employment.
A real job.
A real job. So I called Bellamy and I said, "Phil," I said, "I love you, but this is a guaranteed $125 a week, and you're talking about $75 draw against selling ads. I think I got to take this other job." And he said, "Okay." Good. He said, "I understand." And the newspaper failed, and I had made the right decision.
Wow.
So I worked for Drag Racing Magazine for a few years, writing about all my friends in the drag race business. And I had worn out my welcome at the racetrack, having not run out of money. So The old saying is if you can't do it, you go write about it.
Is that how that works?
Yeah. So that's what I did. I went to work for Drag Racing Magazine. Spent a couple of 3 years there, and then the lure of Peterson Publishing, which was the big house,
the premier publishing facility.
Yeah. Bob Green, who was a motorcycle rider, had seen me on my Matchless, and he loved Matchlesses. So he called me and he said, why don't you come and talk to us about writing for the book division at Peterson. So I went and interviewed and got the job, and I worked there for about a year, and then Alex Exidius, who was named publisher of Hot Rod Industry News, drafted me from the book division over to Hot Rod Industry News because I had retail experience in New Orleans working at the speed shop.